Well, it's a pleasure to be connecting with you this evening. I'm going to talk about the transformation of Switzerland by the gospel. And of course, that's a long story. It first started in probably the 1st century when the first Christians came here. We have a record of a Roman official being converted in Geneva in the 2nd century. And then wave after wave of evangelism and revival came to Switzerland for the next 20 centuries, really. But one of the most important movements, and one that we can learn a lot from, is what happened in Geneva with John Calvin and his team in the 16th century. Now, I won't have time to tell the full story of Geneva, but I'll just give you a few points, a few lessons from Geneva. The full teaching is in 2 places that you can probably find. One is Lauren Cunningham's book, one of his recent books. I think it's the book that changed the nations or something like that. It's about the impact the Bible had on different nations when it was translated into the local language. And he included in his book my teaching on my story of how Geneva got transformed. The other place you can go is YouTube, because I do a tour of Geneva where I take students and we walk around. Well, not just students, sometimes I take pastors and lots of different people, but we walk around old Geneva, the historic center of Geneva, and I tell the story of what happened in those streets and in those buildings. And that's on YouTube, as I said, in 7 different episodes. You type in on the YouTube search bar, Tom Bloomer Geneva, and look around till you get all 7 episodes. And it's best to listen to them in order, 1 through 7. So you can do that later if you like. So what can we learn from the transformation? First, let me say that the transformation of Geneva happened in about 25 years. It's a very short time. And it is probably the transformation of a nation more quickly and more deeply than we know of any other place or time in the history of the church. It was incredible what happened there. And what were the conditions that made this transformation possible? Far deeper than the transformation that happened, for example, in the Reformation of Germany with Luther, or with the English Reformation. Well, the first thing we need to realize is that there was a vacuum in Geneva. There was a very needy city. Geneva of the 16th century, excuse me. Geneva of the 16th century was nothing like what it is now. It was very poor. It had no leadership. The bishop had left the town. The priests had gone with him, and the nobles had gone with them due to some historical circumstances I won't go in with. But the town was without leadership. Many of the business leaders had left also, just a few years earlier, and most of the population was very poor. There was the highest percentage of drinking places anywhere in Europe. So many of the men were not acting as husbands and fathers to their families. The defenses of the city were down. The walls were literally down. And so Geneva was open to attack. I mentioned the poverty. It was also they call it the smelliest city in Europe. It smelled really bad because of swamp lands along the river. And if you lived anywhere near that area of town, you could get sick and die very quickly. So here's the first point. There was a huge felt need for change in Geneva. The people wanted a different way to live. They didn't have anything. They had nothing to hang on to, nothing to value in their former way of life. So they were open to this brand new message that was just starting to sweep across Europe. It had just gotten going in Germany. It actually started in France at the same time as Germany, but the French king started immediate persecution of the Protestants. And the Reformation in France couldn't get going anywhere. And the Protestant leaders had to leave France, run for their lives, and many of them ended up in Geneva because it's surrounded on the western side by France. So they ended up in this little city-state of just a few thousand people. And that's one of the main conditions for a revival and then Reformation. It's felt need of the population. And all the examples we have of revival in history are practically all of them are where there's a felt need like this. In Hawaii, when the missionaries arrived there for the first time in the 19th century, it was the same kind of situation. They had thrown out their system of worship and their whole social system. That there was a righteous queen who was head of her people, and she decided this was not helping us, so she threw it out. And then a few months later, the missionaries arrived with a message of the true God, the God who gave his life for us. So you can talk about Central America in the 1970s and 80s when they had their revival. You can talk about East Africa for that matter. Anywhere where there was a deep move of God, there was a population with a felt need. So people ask me, well, can Geneva have another Reformation today? And I say, no. No, there's no need for change, no felt need in the population. Geneva is very prosperous, it's beautiful, it's got security, it's a safe place to live. It's an hour from the Alps, a couple hours from the ocean. Why would you want to change anything if you live in Geneva? Because transformation is very, very deep change. Okay, the second point we can learn from Geneva is that the leadership there was apostolic, very highly educated, and they became under the Calvin. And so what happened is the leaders of the region in Europe, France, all had to leave France. They tried to stay, but they all had to leave finally, and they ended up in Geneva. So there was a team of ministers there that was just an incredible group of people as we look at history and history of the church. We do not find many other places where this caliber of leadership was together in one place. And it wasn't just spiritual leadership, although they were almost all of them apostolic. Some were more pastoral, but they were very well educated. Calvin himself began his university education training in law. He wasn't just into theology or the Bible. He trained in law. And since he was living in Paris when the Reformation started to break out there, and he saw the beginnings of persecution, they had to run to a town east of Paris to get away from the persecution. He thought a lot about government and what would a biblical government look like. And he saw how evil the king of France was and what a dictator he was, putting people to death for their beliefs. So he thought about, well, if we could start over and build a new type of government based on biblical principles, so what would that look like? So I think he started thinking about this while he was in Paris, while he was on the run from the king's persecution. And then in Geneva, he gets this opportunity of a city without walls, without government, and he can build from the ground up. He can start over completely. And most of the people, not all of them, but most of them, that's exactly what they wanted, because their city was not working. It was not working for families. It was not working for prosperity. It wasn't working for the children. It wasn't working for health, for defense. It wasn't working at all. So they were ready for deep change. Another one of Calvin's team thought deeply about education. This was a man named Viret. He was the only Swiss in the team. The rest were French. And he wrote volumes this thick on biblical education. And they've just been reprinted now for the first time since the 16th century. And he was thinking more deeply about Christian education than anyone I know of in the world today. And I've got a doctorate in it, so I know pretty much the thinking of Christians on education. But here's a key. If you're not thinking very seriously about educating your children and how to educate them biblically, then you're not thinking seriously about your country's future. And if you want to think about your country's future, you've got to think about the children, because it starts there. You can't just minister to adults and expect things to change. You've got to start with the children. So when the two leaders went to the people of Geneva said, hey, we want to become Protestants. So the two leaders went to meet with the 200 voters, the 200 landowning males who could vote at that time. And they said, okay, we'll let you vote on becoming Protestant, but first you have to commit before you vote that you will build a school, a brand new building, and pay for a school yourselves so that every child in this city can be educated. Every child has to know how to read the Bible and to write. And they know how to study the Bible, how to interpret the Bible, and how to do the Bible, how to live the Christian life. So you make that commitment first, and then we'll let you vote. So they made the commitment to build the school, to finance the teachers, and they let them vote, and they all 200 voted to become Protestant. So a Reformation affects every area of life. Revival affects mostly the church. It can spill over into other areas as well. But revival mostly affects the church. What happens when revival starts and then goes toward a Reformation is that there is teaching from the church into every area of society, and every area of society starts to be transformed. And the devil hates this. The enemy of our souls hates this. And this is why so few revivals have become reformations, because the enemy fights it every step of the way. He hates transformation. If a few people get saved, that doesn't bother him so much. He doesn't like that either, but he doesn't hate it like he hates transformation. Because that's when a nation really can start to glorify God and start to fulfill its God-given ministry of being a blessing to other nations, because every nation has received redemptive gifts from the Father. And they were given those gifts to be able to bless the nations. Unfortunately, most of our nations decide to use those gifts selfishly. And we're not interested in blessing other nations. We just want it for us. We want more and more prosperity, more and more blessings, but we don't want to share them too much. Next factor in Geneva's transformation was they preached the gospel every day. Calvin knew that transformation of a nation starts with transformation of an individual. So if the individuals aren't transformed, and then the churches aren't transformed, the church isn't transformed, you can't even think about transforming the nation. So they preached the gospel every day in Geneva. Now, they didn't preach in the streets at that time. They would only preach in churches. But there were several parish churches scattered around the city, and they took turns, and every day of the week, you could go listen to the gospel being preached. And I'm wondering, what about our nations? Do people know where they can go every day of the week to hear the gospel? Not just on Sundays, not just on Wednesday nights or whatever, but every day of the week, do they know where they can go to hear the gospel? Now, since we have Christian radio, TV, and internet now, I think that's very common. It's easier now than it was, say, 30 years ago. And a lot of people who are not even Christians, for example, in America, they go to Christian sources to get their news. They don't like the news on an international media. They go to Christian sources to try to figure out what's happening around the world. So I thank the Lord for those media, but I think we need to do more of this, and we need to do more street preaching in most nations, because street preaching does many things. It doesn't just lead to conversions in bigger churches, but it actually holds down sin. Sin can be reduced in a city if there's regular preaching of the gospel on the streets. And we need more of that in Europe, I guarantee you. So that was a very important principle. And then there was the teaching. Calvin taught several times a week on how to live the Christian life. He was an amazing guy. He died at age 55. But he wrote many books, and we have over 3,000 of the letters he wrote, because he would write letters to people all over Europe. We have one letter that he wrote to the King of England, instructing him how to be a better Christian king than he was. And Calvin was famous throughout Europe at the time, so everybody kept his letters. That's why we have 3,000 of them still left from the 16th century. But he firmly believed that we should not just study the Bible in order to study the Bible. We should study the Bible in order to apply the principles of the Bible to every section of life, every sphere of society. This is what he taught. Every area of society, whether it's banks, schools, businesses, families, whatever, every area of society was created by God originally, given to us to help us organize our lives, but then it fell, because in the fall, all of creation was marred by sin, was twisted by sin. So it all fell. But when Jesus died on the cross, he didn't just die to forgive our sins, he died to redeem all of creation. The physical creation, as well as the human creation of the spheres of society. He died to redeem government, for example. And on and on and on. So Calvin believed that in the Bible were contained all the teachings that we needed in order to see transformation all throughout creation. In us, first of all, it's got to start there. In the church, second, that's where it's got to go next. And from the church all the way out to the rest of society. Now, some people say that Calvin wanted to establish a theocracy in Geneva. In other words, rule by God himself. And that's not true. That is the farthest thing from Calvin's mind. He did not believe the church should govern the city or the state. As a matter of fact, he was asked to be mayor of Geneva at least 3 times, if I remember right. And each time he said, no, that's not my job. I'm to be the leader of the church here. Now, he did believe the church had a role in society. It was twofold. The church's two roles in the rest of society with the other spheres were to teach how to operate your sphere biblically, and to hold that people in that sphere accountable to the teachings of Scripture. One well-known example is the banking sector. And Geneva has always been a center for banking, even before the Reformation, partly because Geneva was always independent and free of occupation from foreign powers. So if you wanted to put your money somewhere safe, you came to Geneva. This has been true for many centuries, not just today. When we're having a huge discussion about Russian oligarch money in Geneva. It seems there are quite a few billions in different Swiss banks. So those accounts are being blocked. Anyway, it's always been the case in Geneva. So Calvin called the bankers together one day and he said, I'm trying to help people find employment in this city and build up prosperity, because poverty is an incredible problem in our city. So, but you're not helping. And they said, why? And he said, because your interest rates are too high. That's a sin. That's the sin of usury. And he showed him in the Old Testament where that was forbidden. And they said, well, what interest rate would you recommend? And he said, I recommend 4%. When you lend somebody money to start a business or whatever, charge them 4% every year. And they agreed, and that decision was hugely important for the prosperity of Switzerland. Because if you know, like when we arrived here in the 70s, if you wanted to buy a house with a mortgage, that mortgage rate was fixed for 100 years. Well, this makes a huge difference in your planning, in your finances and your investments. If you know what your money is going to cost you year in and year out. Then it was reduced to 50 years. And now, of course, it's not that the case anymore. So here's an important principle that we forget today. We think that if we have more teaching, we'll have a reformation. We'll have transformation in our societies. Wrong. Wrong. This is a lie of the enemy of our souls, that we think that transformation comes just from studying the Bible, from knowing the Bible. So how do we know this? Well, if you ask Christians from any committed church in the world, what is the main quality you look for when you're choosing a new pastor? When you're interviewing young pastors, what are you looking for? Most of them, well, they can preach the gospel. They can teach the word of God. They can do systematic exposition of the New Testament, because we think that's how we get to be more spiritually mature. Wrong. That is a Greek idea that has no place in Hebrew thinking. And it has been one of the ways that the enemy has kept the Church of Jesus Christ in immaturity in every nation of the world. So Calvin was not content with just preaching the gospel and teaching the Bible in Geneva. He taught people how to apply the principles of the Bible to every area of their lives. And we don't do this in our churches. Maybe you do there, but we don't do it here, I know for sure. We do not work with people to make sure they're applying the principles of the word in their lives. Here's what happens here in this beautiful land between Geneva down there and Lausanne over there. We have lots of evangelical churches, like dozens, just along here, around the lake. They're not very big. They're anywhere from 100 to 200, maybe 300 people on a Sunday. But people are always in these churches. They're having arguments. They're having conflicts, and that's true in almost every nation that I know of. One of the big problems is gossip, and gossip leads to conflicts and broken relationships. Well, people start criticizing and they get bitter, and then they leave the church, and that's easy to do here because there's another church just a couple kilometers away, and you can go join that church. And the church you left will not follow up. They will not go after you and say, hey, can we talk? We'd like to know why you left. If you still have to leave, fine, but we want to know because we want to fix this if we can. They don't do that here. Nobody is being held for relationship conflict, even among the pastors. And we are living in sin because we're living with broken relationships and not doing anything to try to restore them. This is wrong, friends. This is wrong. We will never have transformation if we're content to live like that. In Calvin's Geneva in the 16th century, there were two roles besides the pastor in every parish. There was a deacon, and the role of the deacon was to look after the poor people. So anytime someone lost their job, or say there was a carpenter and he had a carpentry shop and a fire started and burned up his tools, the deacon's job was to go take care of that family. And he could organize a loan, for example, so the farmer could buy more tools and then repay the money. And everyone was helped to get back to work. They weren't just given money unless they were a widow with children and couldn't go outside the home and work. Then they were given money by the government. I think it was by the church, actually. The church was the one taking care of the poor, not the government. They had what they called a hospital, which met the needs of all the poor and needy and sick in Geneva. Very well organized. And it became the model for all the Protestant charities around the world afterward. Anyway, the other role that they had in every parish was a sort of assistant pastor, and he had one main job for all the people in the parish of that city, hundreds of people, and that was conflict resolution. He kept his ear open, and if he heard of any criticism, any gossip, any people who weren't speaking to each other, he went after them. He went after them. And that, my friends, right there is one reason they had transformation in Geneva. People were not allowed to sit in their sin and to dig their sin holes deeper and make things worse. There was a fear of God on people in Geneva. It wasn't perfect. There were mistakes that were made, but people like John Knox, who was a refugee from Scotland, Protestant refugee, the father of the Puritans, he spent 3 years in Geneva, where he was a pastor of the English-speaking refugees that had come to Geneva, most of them from Scotland, because Scotland had a Catholic queen who was persecuting the Protestants. And he said, this is a city like heaven on earth. He said, I've never even heard of a city that's as blessed as this one. Now, he was in leadership. He was Calvin's personal friend, so he had a kind of a privileged view, but still there are other testimonies we had that it really was an amazing place, very different from other cities in the same region. Travelers who went all around this lake, which is the largest lake in Western Europe, they would go all around it. And on the Swiss side, there was the Reformation, the transformation had happened. And on the French side, it hadn't happened because it stayed Catholic. So they noticed in that first generation, within the first 25 years, from 1536 through 1559, somewhere along in there, 35 maybe, or if you count from the first preaching of the gospel, more like 1533. But anyway, around 25 years. In that first 25 years, people could see with their eyes the difference between poverty and prosperity from that side of the lake to this side of the lake. It happened very quickly because of the different conditions that we've been mentioning. So we think that if we just read the Bible and memorize it and know the Bible and teach the Bible, that everyone will be blessed and mature. Wrong. That is not what Jesus said, friends. Jesus said, it's not enough just to listen to my words. You can listen to my words all day long and it won't help you. Not only will it not help you, not only will it be useless, it will be dangerous to you. Now, he said this in the parable of the two men, one who built his house on the rock and the other one who built his house on the sand. And then when the storm came, the guy who built his house on the sand, his house was just blown away. There was nothing left. Okay, so you go, all right, I've been in several countries when I was a young Bible teacher, and I did this until the Lord convicted me to stop because I was embarrassing people. You ask people, I asked people all over Africa, South America, North America, Europe, what was the mistake of the guy who built his house on the sand? Now, don't answer, please, because 90% of you will get it wrong. That was the percentage I found when I went from nation to nation. We even have a song about this verse. We put this verse to music, and we leave out what Jesus actually said. What was the mistake of the guy who built his house on the sand? 90% of sincere Christians will tell you, well, he didn't listen to Jesus. The other guy listened to Jesus, and this guy didn't listen to Jesus. No, that's not what the Bible says, friends. The Bible says his mistake was not doing the words of Jesus. Both of them listened to Jesus, but one guy did what Jesus said and the other one didn't, and he built his house on the sand. This is why I say it's, if you think just listening to Jesus and studying Jesus is gonna help you, that's not only useless, it's dangerous. Because you will think that because you have studied the Bible so many years and you know the Bible so well, that you are a mature Christian, and you're not. You're not. So you have built your whole life, the whole structure of your life on sand, and it will not last when a storm hits. And friends, we are heading for times when storms are going to hit us. I received a word in 2020 that we are headed for a Great Depression in the world, 7 difficult years, 7 years of famine, even in Western countries. And we have seen just this past week how that can start to happen. So are our houses built on sand or are they built on the rock? So Geneva, Calvin had a whole system, different systems actually, of holding people accountable to do the word of God. Now, there were groups that went too far in this accountability business. And when you get serious about discipleship, that always happens because we are fallen, and Christian leaders are fallen just as much as anyone. So, like, for example, in every neighborhood, there was a group of citizens that could intervene when there were problems in a family. Say a husband was beating his wife. So that group of citizens could come in and tell him to stop, warn him, even call the authorities. Their neighbors watched out over them. So they went too far in some of those situations. But the whole idea was accountability, which we have lost. And we don't have structures of accountability. Even in YWAM, we don't have structures of accountability that really work. And in most churches, as I said, the main thing going on is gossip. It's the main recreational activity of the church. And we need to get to the place where we are applying the Word of God. This is why YWAM's discipleship training school works so well in seeing individuals transformed in a record amount of time. We had a godly theology professor from India who was one of the best known older theologians in India. And he was a professor at one of the top evangelical seminaries in India. But he loved DTSs. He loved teaching young people. So he would come and teach in our DTSs. And he would sit at the dinner table and talk with the young people and hear their stories. And then he'd come back year after year. And he asked one of our leaders once, tell me, how is it that you see more transformation in your students in the 6-month program than we see in 3 years of seminary, a very high level quality Bible teaching? And the guy told him, it's all about application. We don't just study the Bible here. We live in a cross-cultural community where, yeah, we do watch out for each other. We have a culture of caring confrontation, or as the Bible calls it, speaking the truth in love, which is more or less well developed in YWAM bases. In our 40 largest training bases in the world, this is very highly developed and practiced by the entire leadership team. I know because I've checked them out. I've tried to figure out how come these 40 places train 60% of our students worldwide when we have hundreds of other centers that are not training many people at all. Well, this is one of the answers I came up with. Part of it is apostolic leadership, of course, and welcoming of other ministries, the fivefold ministries. You got to have pastoral, you've got to have evangelistic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, prophetic. But a big part of it is this speaking the truth in love, this positive confession, caring confrontation, not letting people get away with negative stuff and criticism and gossip. So we need to seriously reflect, friends, on accountability to the Word. I think in our personal lives as leaders, we need to work this out at our level. Like a leader who said this very simply but very well, when she would meet another leader who wanted help growing, wanted help in being mature Christian leaders, she would ask him this: who can tell you no? Who can tell you no when you say you think you should do something? To whom have you given the right to say, no, don't do that? That's not a good idea. Because you have to give them the right. It can't be imposed from outside or it won't work. So that means that each of us as Christian leaders, we need to know exactly to whom we go with a new idea, a new inspiration. Because guess what, friends? Not all the inspirations and ideas we have are going to be from God. Like the disciples, they were in close touch with Jesus every day, but they did not have only good ideas. Hey, Lord, can we call down fire on those villages over there? Hey, Lord, can you tell us which of us is going to be greatest in the kingdom of heaven? They had really bad ideas sometimes, and so do we. But who can tell you no? I have 3 circles of accountability for I'm accountable to the base leaders here who were 20 years younger than I am, but I'm accountable to them in the way I live my life in this YWAM community. Because I'm part of the community. This is a YWAM apartment I live in, and I participate in some of the community activities, not all of them, but some of them. And I go over there and teach when they want teaching. I'll be going a week from tomorrow to teach an evening. Then in my finances, on my support raising, I'm accountable to a group of Swiss pastors. They have asked me for budgets. They've helped me raise funds. They've written letters for me, and they have really been a help to me. This is the group also that's helping me be a steward of this word I received that we're headed for 7 difficult years, because that word was not well received by Christian leaders here in Switzerland. And it was hard for me trying to carry that thing by myself. So they stepped in and are standing with me shoulder to shoulder in that whole process. And then in my teaching, I'm accountable to University of the Nations leadership. And a couple of them I've been able to very regularly over the years submit my theological impressions. Like, I think the Lord is saying this about that passage. Does that sound reasonable to you? Because I don't see anyone else saying that. So they tell me, yeah, I think that's right. You should preach it. So I'm accountable to different groups according to which areas of my life we're talking about. And I would encourage you to do the same. And think very seriously about this question. Who can tell you no? Because if you don't know immediately the answer to that question, you are in danger, friend. You are in a state of spiritual vulnerability. And you are set up for failure. So please don't do that. Now, sometimes we have to be careful about this, because if we give people the right to say no, then we have to listen to them. And this is a mistake we have made in YWAM more than once in our whole legal structure, because we're set up as an association in most nations, a Christian association, a mission, something like that. And we have to have a legal board. But that legal board can really stop what the Lord wants to do also. So if you have a legal structure that has the authority to say no, that's good, but you better make sure you have discipled those friends, and that they really deeply understand your vision and what the Lord has said to you. I think it was Wycliffe, but I may have the details wrong, but it was a Bible translation mission that wanted to translate into all languages. And they had a board of very narrow-minded people, and the board said, no, that's too much. We don't want to do all languages. And they stopped them for years from taking on the burden, the task of helping to translate the Bible into all the languages of the world. And Lauren was friends with the director of this mission, and he said, that's not going to happen in YWAM. So he has a teaching about this, where our accountability board group of people has to be 1/3 YWAMers from that location, like from this base, 1/3 YWAMers from international, other nations, and 1/3 committed Christians who are not YWAMers. And they can be from different parts of life. They don't have to all be pastors. Because a pastor, his tendency is going to want to turn a mission into a church. And a mission is not the same thing as a church. they're very similar. They overlap a lot, as you well know. But and then if you have a businessman on your board, he'll want to turn your mission into a business, which it's not, even though there's some overlap. You have to run a school, a training center, a mission training center like we have. You have to run it like a business. You've got to have income that's got to pay your bills on time, and et cetera, et cetera. So there are certain similarities, but you got to be very careful in this accountability things. It's worth doing it right, investing the time to do it right. And some leaders of Christian missions have a policy of discipling their new board members for years. They work with them for years. They meet with them, they go on retreats, they pray together for years before they give them that authority over their ministry. But I know if I meet someone whose only board is composed of the spouse and a couple of the kids, and maybe a cousin or two, that's trouble. That means there is no real accountability. And most Christian organizations function on the principle that your relatives cannot be on the board. Your spouse cannot be on your legal board. Your children cannot be on your legal board. For this very reason, that we need real accountability. Because guess what? One of the things that Calvin taught was we are going to be accountable one day before that throne of judgment. And we will stand there before that throne alone. And there's not going to be anyone else around. There's not going to be a spouse. There's not going to be a pastor or a priest or a church or a mass or any religious ceremony or our title. None of that's going to be there before that throne. It's going to be us. And it's going to be us accounting for everything we've ever done in life and everything we've never done in life. Calvin was the first person in history to talk about the importance of minutes. Nobody cared about minutes before Calvin. But he said, in 1 minute, your whole life can change. A minute is a long time in the sight of eternity. You can do incredible good in a minute, or you can do incredible harm. So the Lord God himself is going to hold you responsible for every minute of your life. So he had this very high view of the importance of the individual. Europe before Calvin was a group culture, like it is in most of the nations of the world today. Individuals did not decide important things by themselves. If it was an important decision affecting your whole life, you had to make it with your group, your families, or maybe your village, your leaders, whatever structure that is. And Europe was a group culture. And even our European names today reflect this. Like our names, mine is Bloomer. It comes from the German Bloom, because my ancestors were apparently flower gardeners. So our family names are either names of our trade, our profession, like Mueller, farmer, all these names that mean different professions, or they were place names. So we were identified in our very name as part of a group. That was our identity. Well, Calvin came along and things started to change with him when he talked about the importance of the individual. This is why he wanted to teach every child how to read and study the Bible, because he said, you are going to stand before God himself. You got to be ready. The only way to be ready is to know the word and to know what it means and to do it. Because you'll be held accountable, not just for knowing it, but are you doing it? Did you do it in your lifetime? This is also why Calvin, he not only gave us universal education, he gave us the keys to economic prosperity, and one of which is education, But the other one is hard work. He had a theology of work that was incredible, that goes beyond any kind of theology of work we have today, because most of us come from cultures that don't value work, especially physical work. In the Christian culture, we value study. We value the ministries of the word. We value those who know the most about God and know the most about Bible. It's not what the Bible values. But Calvin said, your work is how you worship God. And you better work as if heaven were watching, because guess what? Heaven is watching. Heaven is watching every minute of your working day, and you had better work harder and better and with more precision than anyone else. And that's why this side of the lake got more prosperous within 25 years, because the people on this side of the lake decided to work better and harder than any other people in the world. And we still have that reputation in Switzerland, which is why we sell machine tools to Germany and very big, complicated coffee making machines to Chinese hotels. They cost more than any other machines in the world. I saw a television show, they were interviewing these Chinese hotel keepers. They said, why do you buy these Swiss machines? And they said, simple, less maintenance. So our machines work better for a longer time than other machines. How long we will keep that inheritance of the Reformation, I don't know, because we're rapidly throwing it out. We're getting rid of our Christian inheritance. We don't value it, which is a very immature thing, is to despise your inheritance. It shows our immaturity as a culture. And the other thing Calvin gave us was democracy, because he said, since our children know how to read and know the principles of the Bible, when they grow up, they should be able to participate in the decisions of the government. So in Geneva, we had democracy. Even the women could vote on certain questions in certain sectors of society that kind of changed over time. The other reason Calvin believed in democracy is because he had lived under the King of France, which was the most centralized power anywhere, just about, and the most evil rulers anywhere, because the power was centralized. There was no accountability to the leadership. So here we have accountability comes in again. In Switzerland, the leaders are accountable to us. If they pass a law in our parliament and we don't like it, we can get 50,000 people to sign a petition and we get to vote. All the people get to vote. The people holds the government responsible. It's direct democracy. And we have more accountability, and our power is more decentralized, diffused in Switzerland than in any other nation. And that is an old Swiss tradition that Calvin came along and took in the 16th century and gave us a theology for. And theology was basically, hey, we're all sinners and we're all going to sin. So your government's going to sin, your business leaders, your church leaders are going to sin. So get ready for it. Build into your structures barriers to sin, because sin is going to happen. And we're romantics. We prove this every time a Christian leader sins or a government official. Lately, it's Boris Johnson in England. We're all surprised. How could he do that? Well, it's very simple. Calvin wouldn't be surprised. He can do that because he's a sinner. And we're all going to sin. In French, one of the words for barriers, like the barriers around a ship's rail to keep people from falling off, one of the words in French is garde-fou, which means literally hold back the crazy people. Because a ship has to have rails, because the crazy people are going to fall off. They're going to get too close to the edge. Well, we need garde-fou in our governments, in our church structures, in our finances. We need barriers to sin. And we need to decentralize power and make sure it's not just one or two people deciding everything for everyone. Okay, I think I'll close there. And we have time for questions, correct?
Yes, thank you so much, Tom. You have taught us great things and really challenged us to think. So if there are questions or comments from people, now would be the time to ask Tom, and he can answer your questions.
Maybe. So just ask easy questions, please.
My name is Martin Kansiki from Malawi. I really appreciate the information you've given us. It's quite useful to some of us, especially in Malawi, because as church leaders and also as business people, most of the points that you have raised have been seen to be relevant in what we do every day. And I think it's also helped us, although of course we cannot go back to 16th century, where I think things were a little bit straightforward. These days, I think there are a lot of complexities. But I think the most important thing is we have to move by example, and we have to be the leaders of tomorrow and make sure that at least we also involve the children, teach them, and it should be hands-on, so that at least our tomorrow will be better than what it is today. I entirely agree with everything that you've said, and I think we are going to reflect on everything that you have said. I have recorded the message, and I'll be listening to it very often, so that at least we can actually translate it into action. We are one of the deprived nations because of several factors, but I think Christianity has been playing a very important role in Malawi since the 17th century. But I think things are changing now because as leaders, we seem to be reluctant to move and interact with the people who are making mistakes, which is a serious omission. And I think from the contribution that you've made, I think I've really been blessed. So that is my comment. I'll be reflecting on everything that you have said, and the good thing is it's about spirituality, it's about the Bible. So certainly, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment.
Perfect. Maybe if there are others that want to say something or have a question.
I was surprised to hear that before Calvin, Geneva was very much, how did you say, group, a culture of groups. And as King's Institute for Transformation, we we have on our heart to build teams for transformation with the goal to help people, to help people to come together, to join as a group, and to give each other the right to ask you questions so that you know who can tell you no. But my observation, not only in Malawi, also in Switzerland, is it's tough. People don't like this.
No.
It looks so easy in a way, but why are we not starting with the smallest pieces and give each other the right to ask questions? I hope we all think about, and in a way, it brings me back to the fact that life is not very complicated, but it's hard to do it.
Yes.
So let's keep it easy and do the easy thing and do the hard things. And if you make a little small step every day, a lot of things can change. And that's how transformation happens.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Someone else?
Thank you very much, Tom, for the inspiring lecture. We'd like to hear from you. Why did John Calvin thought that education is the key to transform the city of Geneva? And what lessons can we draw from his approach for us Malawians? Thank you so much.
Well, we need to remember that in his time, people were not taught to read. The Catholic Church was never interested in getting the Bible translated into local languages. They did not want people to read the local languages, to read the Bible in their local language, because they would find out that a lot of things the Catholic Church was teaching were not in the Bible. This is what both Luther in Germany and Calvin in Geneva realized when they read the Bible. Hey, there's no purgatory in here. Does everyone know what purgatory is? It's this doctrine that's not in the Bible at all. It's invented by Catholics. It's the intermediary place between this life that we're living now and heaven. And even if you're a pretty good Christian, when you die, you don't go to heaven. You go to this intermediary place called purgatory. And it's not hell, but it's not a nice place either. You don't want to spend much time there. So the Catholic Church said, hey, we know how long you're going to be in purgatory. It's going to be hundreds or thousands of years. But guess what? You can get out. All you have to do is give us money. So they were making huge amounts of money, fortunes, the biggest fortunes in Europe, for people who are wanting to buy their way out of purgatory. Now, if you didn't have any money, you could also go to do a pilgrimage where you walk on foot from anywhere in Europe clear to Western Spain and visit the bones of St. James, the Apostle James. And a lot of people who did that got healing miracles. So that was, we don't know how many thousands of people or hundreds of thousands did that pilgrimage, but they're still doing it today. But Calvin and Luther said, no, we're going to read the Bible and we're going to teach the Bible. So it was this incredible hunger, which we can't even understand now, this hunger to read the Word of God and to know what the Bible actually said, because it was a forbidden book. Friends, it was still forbidden in Europe in the 1970s. YWAM teams were smuggling New Testaments into Spain in the 1970s because you couldn't buy a New Testament in Spain. The Catholic Church was saying no. So that's why this book of Lawrence is so interesting, because whenever the Bible was translated, it changed everything. Just to give you an example from Geneva, when they first preached the Reformation in Geneva, they were run out of town. but they left behind one of the team who was a school teacher. And the businessmen in town had already decided, hey, we want this Reformation thing. We've heard about it from our German friends. It's happening in the German-speaking part of Switzerland. We want it for Geneva. This is the way to go. So they hired this guy to teach the children of Geneva. At the time, it was just only for wealthy children. And there weren't many of those. It was one room and all the grades together, like all schools were back then. And so he started teaching the children to read from the Bible, because the Bible had just been translated into French and just printed in French for the first time in history. It was much later in French than it was in English, for example. So the parents heard their kids came home from school and said, hey, Mom and Dad, we're learning how to read from the Bible. And the parents said, what? We want to learn this too. So they all went down to school the next day and they told this guy, hey, teach us to read the Bible too, please. Because there was such a hunger to know the truth, to know this forbidden book, and to try to figure out why couldn't they read it for so many centuries? Why had they not been taught to read before? So there are too many of them to fit into this one classroom. So they took the teacher down to the marketplace. Someone needs to mute their microphone. Okay, thank you. They took the teacher down to the marketplace. They put the teacher on a table and they said, okay, preach to us now. Give us this new message. And so he preached the message right there in the marketplace. And the authorities came around and started listening to him. And he preached, we must reform the church in order to reform the nation. And they kicked him out of town. But it was only the year after that they voted them to become Protestants. But I think it's impossible for us to understand the hunger there was to be able to learn how to read. Even if the church did teach you to read back then, they taught you to read Latin. They didn't teach you to read your own language because there wasn't much in your own language anyway. It wasn't until later centuries that there are a lot of books printed in French and German and Italian and the main languages of Europe at the time. But they taught you to read Latin because Latin was the language of the church across all of Europe. And one of the reasons they only taught Latin was because then they kept the Bible to their leadership, the elite people, the priests, not all the priests either. Many of the priests couldn't read at all, but to the elite of the church were the only ones who could read. So there was a huge injustice thing. And so the message of Calvin that the individual is important. Hey, I'm so important. I Bible. I need to know how to study the Bible, and my vote is important, and my children are important. This is incredible, dynamite message. And we have to remember that the people listening to it, they've been raised Catholics for centuries. So when this new message came along, which was so different in so many ways and so revolutionary, to give up being Catholic and to become a Protestant, they were risking their eternal salvation. They didn't know if they would get to heaven after all. They'd been trying to walk their way out of purgatory for years, maybe, or giving the money they had to the priest so he would say a mass for them and they'd get a few years knocked off purgatory. But they were risking their eternity to follow this new message. But millions of them decided to do it. And I think it's important for us and for our children, education is, because it's really through education that we shape the future of the nation. And Christians are terrible at thinking long-term, friends. Because of the teaching that Jesus is going to come rapture us out of here any minute, We have become short-term thinkers. Calvin would be appalled at the way we think. So for years, Christians have only thought short-term. They haven't thought about the spheres. They haven't thought about education. They were even taught in Switzerland here until 30 years ago, don't vote. When there's an election comes along, don't vote, because that's the world system. And Jesus is going to come and take us out of here anyway. So why vote for the government? That's heresy. And guess what? Jesus didn't come. And here's something else. He's not going to come anytime soon. Period. I won't go into the detail of that, but I believe it very strongly. I've been saying it for over 30 years. I first said it in public in a pastor's meeting. There were 120 pastors. I said, Jesus is not coming back anytime soon, in French, and you could hear around the room as all the pastors thought, oh no, heresy, fire is going to come down from heaven and fry this American. Well, it didn't, and Jesus didn't come back. But saying that in public simplified my life considerably, because I wasn't invited to speak in a church for about 30 years. Now I'm being invited again by some churches. But if we are not thinking very seriously about how to shape our children for the future we want, we can be assured that someone else is. And some of the people working in the education ministries in our nations are the most radical Marxist leftists who want to destroy the family, they want to destroy private property, and they want to destroy the church. And they're working on it very explicitly right now. So this is why education is very important. Now, I've heard that in much of Africa, the Christian school movement is very strong, partly because the state, most of the governments don't have enough money to give good education to all the children. This is a huge problem in West Africa and in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I don't know what the situation is in Mali, but there are many thousands of Christian schools across the continent, and we have brought some of the directors of Christian school networks here to Birchany for a seminar a couple summers ago, and I had the privilege of teaching those leaders of Christian education. But it's a movement that we all need to get behind, these Christian schools. We cannot leave the responsibility of educating our children and therefore shaping our future and our children's future to the state. We cannot. It's not easy. Every Christian school I know of has had to fight a battle to simply exist. It is expensive because we're in unjust national systems where we have to pay taxes to support the schools, and the schools are teaching stuff that we don't even believe is true. In France right now, I've heard, I haven't checked this out, but a child before primary school can decide if they want to change their gender or not. They don't have to have their parents' permission. The parents are not even notified. They can just decide, hey, I've been told I'm a little boy, but I want to be a little girl. The operation is done and it's paid for by our taxes. This is insanity, friends, and that's what's happening in our schools. So we need to get serious about taking back education for the church and for the future of the nation.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we are gonna end it here now. Tom, thank you so much for all your input. Thank you for spending your time with us, teaching us, challenging us so much. Yeah, thank you all for being here. We're gonna end with some practical announcements. We are planning to go to Malawi from the 16th to the 30th of May, and we are looking for a team that is coming with us. We want to visit several places that we have contacts, and we want to encourage the leaders there And we are planning a forum of transformation from the 19th to the 21st of May in Malawi. And you are warmly welcome to contact us to see how you can partner with us. So if you have any questions about that, please contact us. Yeah, and we can see how we can serve you, how we can help you, and how we can partner together. Yeah, the next online forum will be on the 15th of June after our trip to Malawi. And if Marcus maybe has anything to add to these announcements, you can do that now, please.
Thank you, Angela. You did a great job. No, I can simply, it's 1 week, I'm back from Malawi. We have traveled a lot of places. We had visited a lot of people to prepare the time in May. And I'm excited how we have been able to build relationship. And I think it will be a very good time in May. So everyone interested to have a training, to talk about transformation and worldview issues, you are highly welcome to contact us so that we can organize this time.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Marcus. Thank you, Tom, for being here, for teaching us. We appreciate it a lot. Thank you, everyone, for joining us and listening. It was a great, great time. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to contact us, and have a great night, and we'll see each other next time.